118 lives lost. 304 of them were children. The Jonestown massacre is remembered as one of the darkest chapters in modern history. A moment when utopia turned into nightmare and hundreds of voices were silenced in a single day. But within that staggering number lies a more intimate and haunting tale, the fate of Jim Jones's own 8 children. From the outside, the Jones family looked like a living symbol of progress. Jim and his wife Marceline built what they called a rainbow family, a household of biological and adopted children from different races meant to embody the ideals of equality, compassion, and unity that the People's Temple claimed to represent. Photographs from the early years show smiling faces, siblings holding hands, the picture of innocence and belonging. For a moment, it seemed to work. But as Jim Jones's grip on his followers tightened, that dream twisted into something far more sinister. The children who once symbolized love and harmony became unwilling participants in a world of fear, control, and blind devotion. Some remained loyal, some resisted, and some, tragically, would never escape. In this story, we pull back the curtain on their hidden journeys. You'll meet the daughter who broke away years before the massacre, carrying the heavy burden of warning others about what was coming. You'll hear about the son whose life was spared not by faith or chance, but by something as ordinary and extraordinary as a basketball game that took him away from Jonestown on the final day. And you'll witness the battle for a child Jim Jones claimed as his own, a bitter custody war that revealed just how far the temple was willing to go to maintain control. This isn't just the downfall of a cult leader, it's the unraveling of a family. A story where children were raised to be symbols of hope, only to be dragged into their father's nightmare. Some perished alongside him. A few survived and were forced to rebuild lives forever haunted by a last name the world would never forget. So what truly happened to the sons and daughters of Jim Jones? Their stories are tragic, surprising, and deeply human. And they may change the way you see one of history's most infamous events. Number 8. Agnes Pauline Jones. Agnes was Jim and Marceline Jones's first adopted child, taken in back in 1954 when she was around 10 or 11 years old. She came from a troubled background. Some say she had Native American roots and became the big sister of the Jones household. Agnes grew up during the early days of People's Temple and even worked as a nurse and caregiver within the church as a young woman. People remember her as kind and free-spirited, but also someone who struggled with the strange, high-pressure world her father created. As an adult, Agnes had moments of doubt and rebellion. She left the People's Temple several times, only to return again, torn between love for her family and fear of her father's wrath. Agnes eventually married a fellow temple member, becoming Agnes Bishop, and had 4 children of her own. Yet she remained connected to the temple even as she sometimes questioned it. Being Jim Jones's daughter wasn't easy. She had to share her dad with an entire cult of followers, and that took an emotional toll. Tragically, Agnes's journey ended in Jonestown. Despite her earlier doubts, she followed her parents to the temple's agricultural commune in Guyana in the late 1970s. On November 18, 1978, when Jim Jones ordered his followers to die, Agnes at 35 was among the victims. She died after ingesting cyanide poison mixed into a sweet drink along with over 900 others. Even more heartbreaking, Agnes's entire immediate family perished with her. Her husband and all 4 of her young children died that day as well. 3 generations of Agnes' family were wiped out in an instant. It's a haunting fate for the little girl who was adopted to prove that all are equal. In Jim Jones's final will, he had even disinherited Agnes, perhaps due to her wavering loyalty. Yet in the end, she was there in Jonestown, paying the ultimate price for her father's delusion. Number 7. Suzanne O. Jones. Suzanne was another of the Joneses' adopted children, a Korean-American girl brought into the family in 1959 when she was 6 years old. Growing up, Suzanne was part of Jim's grand experiment in equality. She called him Dad and lived among the diverse Jones household. But as she got older, Suzanne began to see the cracks in her father's facade. Unlike some of her siblings, she chose a very different path. She left the People's Temple years before the Jonestown tragedy. In the early 1970s, Suzanne married a temple member named Mike Cartmill. Together, they became increasingly uncomfortable with Jim Jones's control and the cult's direction. By 1973, Suzanne did something brave. She and her husband defected from the temple. They packed up and walked away, determined to build a normal life. After leaving, Suzanne became an outspoken critic of the temple's abuses and manipulation. Of course, this did not sit well with Jim. He was furious at what he saw as her betrayal, and in Jonestown, he essentially wrote her off as an enemy. But Suzanne's decision to leave ultimately saved her life. On that fateful day in 1978, while her father and hundreds of followers met their end in Guyana, Suzanne was safe in California, far removed from the madness. Her parents had even disowned her in their wills. In the years after, Suzanne had to live with the knowledge of what happened to her family. Her mother Marceline, father Jim, and several siblings were gone. It was a heavy burden, but she continued her life outside the cult's shadow. She and Mike had 2 children, and she kept a relatively low profile, focusing on family and privacy. Sadly, Suzanne's story quietly ended in 2006, when she died of colon cancer at the age of 54. She had lived nearly 3 decades beyond Jonestown, forging her own path. Suzanne's life shows that escaping a cult can be incredibly hard. It meant losing her family, but it also shows that survival and a fresh start are possible. Number 6, Stephan Gandhi Jones was born in 1959 and named after Mahatma Gandhi as a symbol of peace. He grew up literally surrounded by the People's Temple movement. Imagine being a kid and seeing your dad revered by crowds as a prophet and healer. For Stephan, that was normal life. In the early years, he experienced the best of what the temple aspired to. A community of all races, living together, helping the poor, fighting for civil rights. But as Stephan became a teenager, he also saw his father's dark side, the growing ego, the strict rules, and the feeling that he had to share his dad with thousands of others. Jim was often so busy being father to the whole church that he had little time to be a normal father to Stephan. Despite some teenage rebellion and skepticism about his dad, Stephan remained involved in the temple and eventually moved to Jonestown in 1977. In Guyana, he tried to carve out a bit of normal teen life by focusing on sports. In fact, Stephan was a key player on the Jonestown basketball team. That ordinary hobby turned out to be life-saving. On November 18, 1978, 19-year-old Stephan and several other young men, including his brother Tim, were away in Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, playing in a basketball tournament. They had no idea that back at Jonestown, their father was orchestrating a nightmare. When news came that a group of temple defectors and a U.S. congressman had been attacked at a nearby air airstrip, Stephan and his team sensed something was very wrong. They even tried to charter a plane to rush back to Jonestown, hoping to stop whatever was about to happen. But it was too late. Authorities detained the team in Georgetown as reports of mass deaths emerged. This twist of fate, being away for a ball game, meant Stephan survived the massacre. But survival came with immense pain. Stephan was absolutely devastated. He lost his mother. Marceline was poisoned. His father, Jim Jones, shot himself. His younger brother Lew and little brother Kimmo, his sister Agnes, and her kids, and countless friends he had grown up with. Imagine being 19 and almost your entire family and community are suddenly gone by your father's hand. In the aftermath, Stephan grappled with overwhelming survivor's guilt. He later admitted he often asked himself for the forgiveness of those who died, wondering if they felt abandoned by him. For years, he struggled with anger and trauma. But Stephan also chose to move forward with his life. He refused to be defined entirely by the sins of his father. Stephan quietly built a new life. He married, had 3 daughters, and worked an ordinary job far away from the spotlight of his father's infamy. Eventually, he even found the strength to speak publicly in documentaries and interviews, openly reflecting on his father and the tragedy, hoping to prevent anything like Jonestown from happening again. Today, Stephan Jones is in his mid-60s and still carries the weight of Jonestown. But he has managed to find love, raise a family, and create an identity beyond just Jim Jones's son. His story is one of pain, yes, but also of resilience. Number 5. Lew Eric Jones was one of the Korean War orphans adopted by Jim and Marceline. Born in South Korea in 1956, little Lew was about 2 years old when the Joneses welcomed him into their family. They gave him an American name, and he grew up as a beloved son in the Jones rainbow family. Lew was known as a sweet, quiet boy in his youth. As he grew, he stayed deeply involved in temple life. He was a living symbol of his parents' ideals of racial unity. Unlike some siblings who questioned Jim Jones, Lew remained loyal to his father and the cause. By the time the temple moved to Jonestown, Lew was in his early 20s. In the jungle community, he even started a family of his own. Lew had a partner in Jonestown, Terry, and together they had a baby boy named Chae-ok in 1977. Becoming a father made Lew happy. There are photos of him proudly holding his infant son, smiling. But that happiness would not last. On the final day of Jonestown, 21-year-old Lew and his 1-year-old son Chae-ok both lost their lives. When the poison was distributed, parents were told to dose their children first. It's painful to imagine, but Lew's little boy was likely given cyanide-laced flavor aid by the very people who loved him. Lew himself then drank the poison. Father and son died together among the hundreds of victims. Lew's death showed just how all-consuming Jim Jones's control had become. Jim had raised Lew from a toddler and ultimately convinced him that revolutionary suicide was somehow a justified, even noble act. Lew didn't run or resist. He followed his father's directive to the very end, at the cost of his entire young family. Out of Jim Jones's children, Lew was one who stayed utterly devoted, and it cost him everything. Today, the memory of Lew is bittersweet for surviving family members. He's remembered as a kind young man who should have had a long life ahead of him. Instead, his name, along with baby Chae-ok's, is listed among the 918 lost in Jonestown. Number 4. Stephan Jones. Not all of Jim Jones's children lived to see Jonestown. One was lost far earlier. Stephan Jones was another Korean child the Jones family adopted, and she was the youngest daughter. Her Korean name was Yoon-sun, and she was around 4 years old when Jim and Marceline brought her into their home in late 1958. Stephanie was a bright, playful little girl, and the Joneses cherished her, but fate dealt a cruel hand. In May 1959, just a few months after her adoption tragedy struck, Stephanie was riding in a car with several People's Temple members returning from a church event in Indiana when they were involved in a horrific car accident. The crash killed 6 people, and little Stephanie, only 5 years old, was one of them. The Jones family was devastated. This was their first personal brush with tragedy. Marceline had hoped to save this child from a war-torn homeland and give her a beautiful future, only to lose her in a random accident. Jim Jones preached at Stephanie's memorial, no doubt struggling to make sense of such a loss. Stephanie's death happened long before the world had heard of Jonestown, but it is a poignant chapter in the Jones family saga. In a way, Stephanie was the first casualty connected to Jim Jones's dream, albeit by accident, not by any cult activity. Because she died in 1959, Stephanie never experienced the later chaos of the temple's move to California and then Guyana. She remains a sweet, innocent memory from the time when People's Temple was still just a small Indiana church. Her story often gets overshadowed by the enormity of Jonestown. But it shouldn't be forgotten that Jim and Marceline lost a daughter nearly 2 decades before the massacre. Stephanie's brief life reminds us that even in a story filled with intentional evil, there were also moments of simple human tragedy. Number 3. Timothy Tim Glenn Tupper Jones, born in 1959, who came into the temple through his biological parents, who were loyal members of Jim Jones's church. Jim and Marceline ended up adopting Tim when he was a child, making him one of their sons. Tim was about the same age as Stephan, and the 2 boys grew up like brothers. Tim was known for being athletic and outgoing. In fact, he was a standout baseball pitcher in high school before the temple uprooted the kids to move to Guyana. In Jonestown, teenage Tim found the harsh conditions tough, so he focused on something he loved: basketball. Along with Stephan and others, Tim played on the Jonestown basketball team, and this routine ultimately saved his life. On the day of the massacre, 19-year-old Tim was in Georgetown with a team for a tournament. Had he been in Jonestown, he likely would have died with the rest. Instead, Tim survived the immediate events of November 18, 1978. But survival did not mean he was unheard. In a single day, Tim lost everything. His adoptive parents, Jim and Marceline, and many friends were dead. Even more crushing, Tim's young wife and their baby daughter were in Jonestown, and both were killed by the poison. Yes, Tim had started a family as a teenager in Jonestown, only to have them taken away. He also later learned that some of his extended biological family who had joined the temple died as well. It's hard to overstate the shock and grief he went through. After returning to the United States, Tim struggled to adjust to a normal life. He was haunted by guilt and trauma, often wondering if he could have done something to stop the tragedy if he had been there, or why he was allowed to live when so many others didn't. For a long time, Tim kept a low profile and battled depression and anger. What eventually pulled him through was building a new family. He remarried and had 4 children, and he found that being a father again gave him purpose and a kind of healing. His children became his anchor to the world and proof that love could endure beyond the cult. In time, Tim made a degree of peace with his past, though he never forgot it. He occasionally joined his brother Stephan in speaking with researchers or participating in survivor reunions, but mostly he lived quietly. In 2019, at age 59, Timothy Tupper Jones passed away from a heart attack. Those who knew him mourned the gentle, resilient man he had become. Tim's life was scarred by Jonestown, but it was also marked by quiet strength and the ability to find hope after unimaginable loss. Number 2. John Victor John Moss Jones. Born in 1972, Little John's parentage was entangled in temple drama. His mother was Grace Stowen, a prominent temple member, and Grace's husband was a lawyer named Tim Stowen. However, Jim Jones claimed that he, not Tim, was John's biological father. According to Jim, Grace had a secret affair with him, and John was the result. Many who knew the situation believed this was a lie Jim concocted to maintain power over the stands. But Jim insisted the boy was his. He even informally renamed the child John Moss Jones and treated him as a son. For the first few years of Jay's life, Grace and Tim Sten were part of the temple, and Jim's claim on the boy was an internal issue. But in 1976, Grace defected from the People's Temple, leaving her little boy behind in the care of temple members. Jones wouldn't let her take him. Thus began a bitter and public custody battle. Grace desperately wanted her son back. Jim Jones was equally determined not to lose his child. The battle over John became one of the driving obsessions of Jim Jones's final years. It fueled his paranoia and anger at the outside world. In 1977, as legal pressure mounted, Jones whisked 5-year-old John Victor off to Jonestown in Guyana, effectively putting him out of the reach of U.S. courts. Grace continued to fight in court and at one point actually won a custody order in California, but it was unenforceable in Guyana. The case was still unresolved in Guyana courts by November 1978. Tragically, little John became a victim of this power struggle in Jonestown. John Victor was just another kid in the community, probably unaware of the tug-of-war over him. On November 18, 1978, when the poison ritual began, John was 6 years old. He was one of nearly 300 children in Jonestown who were killed that day. The method was ghastly. Aides used syringes to squirt cyanide lace liquid into the mouths of the youngest children or anyone who resisted. It's almost certain that John had this poison put into him without fully understanding what was happening. He died there among all the other children. News of Jay's death was devastating to Grace Stowen. She had fought so hard to save her son, only to have him perish in the massacre. Jim Jones had once ominously said he'd rather see the boy dead than back with his mother. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. John Victor Stowen's short life and tragic end highlight the utter insanity of Jonestown. A little boy became a pawn in a deadly ideological game. To this day, John's story is remembered as one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the Jonestown saga. A reminder that innocent children often suffer the most for the misguided actions of adults. Number 1. Jim Jones Kem. He was the baby of the family in every sense. The youngest child and the secret son, born from Jim's relationship with his top aide, Carolyn Layton. Kimmo was born in 1975 in California, just as the People's Temple was preparing to relocate to Guyana. His name Jim John was a combination of Jim and John, echoing his father's, but to avoid confusion and perhaps to soften the circumstances of his birth. Everyone called him Kimmo. To dodge scandal, since Jim was still married to Marceline, the baby's legal last name was given as Prokes after Temple member Michael Prokes, hiding the fact that Jim Jones was the father. But within the group, it was understood who Kimmo's father was. Little Kimmo spent his entire short life inside the world of People's Temple. As an infant, he was doted on by his mother Carolyn and by Jim whenever Jim had the time. Despite the awkward family situation, Marceline Jones even helped care for Kimmo at times, treating him kindly. In 1977, one-year-old Kimmo moved to Jonestown with Carolyn and the rest of the inner circle. He was a carefree toddler in the jungle, adored by the community family. He had no way of knowing the tension and danger that was building around him. On the final day of Jonestown, Kimmo was only 3 years old. When his father decreed that everyone should die peacefully, Carolyn Layton stayed utterly loyal. In a heartbreaking and horrific act, she administered poison to her own child. She likely believed in her warped, brainwashed state that she was sparing Kimmo from a worse fate at the hands of imaginary enemies. The poison killed the toddler in minutes. Carolyn herself took poison shortly after. Baby Kimmo died in his mother's arms, an innocent life snuffed out by the very people who should have protected it. He was one of the youngest victims of the massacre. Kimmo's death is one of the most haunting images of Jonestown. The idea that a father's madness led to a mother poisoning her baby. Had he lived, Jim John Kimmo Jones would be around 50 years old today. He never got that chance. Instead, he will forever remain a symbol of lost innocence.